The night Robert Urbach walked out of the casino in Guadalajara beside a woman he had only just met on Tinder, he was smiling, easy, unguarded, the smile of a man who believed the evening still held promise. He was in his 60s, a retired American who had once staged concerts for a living and now lived near a quiet lake resort favored by expats seeking cheaper rents and slower days. The woman was much younger. On the app she called herself Sissy. She was friendly, bilingual, quick with a laugh, and seemed genuinely interested in him. They ordered drinks, lingered over conversation that felt easy, and eventually left the bright lights of the casino together. 2 days later, Mexican police found the body of a middle-aged man dumped along a roadside outside the city. He had been asphyxiated. There was no identification on him, no wallet, no phone, nothing that might have told investigators who he was or where he had come from. Authorities buried him in a common grave with other unidentified dead, one more anonymous case in a system already stretched thin. It took years before anyone connected the body to Robert Urbach. By then, the woman who had walked out of the casino with him that night had already moved on to other men. That night was not the beginning of everything. It was simply the moment when her pattern turned deadly enough that 2 countries finally had to pay attention. Aurora Phelps was born in Arkansas in 1981. When she was still a toddler, her parents moved the family to Guadalajara, and from then on her childhood unfolded in a constant back and forth between the United States and Mexico. She grew up speaking both English and Spanish, though neither language came out perfectly fluent. Over the years, she cycled through a string of names: Aurora Flores, Aurora Velasco, Aurora Alvarez, Sissy, slipping from one identity to the next as circumstances required. She married, had children, struggled with money, fought bitter custody battles, and eventually ran afoul of the law in Arkansas for filing a false police report. In 2018, she pleaded guilty and received probation. After that chapter closed, she left that life behind and resurfaced in Las Vegas with a new husband and a new, more calculated way of making money. Her method was simple and cruel. She built profiles on dating apps like Tinder, Hinge, and Bumble. The photos showed a smiling, approachable woman. The bios were short and carefully worded. She was looking for friends, no fake people. She mostly targeted older men in their 60s and 70s, who were divorced, widowed, or simply lonely. Many of them had savings, retirement accounts, social security checks, cars, and houses. She met them for lunch or coffee. She listened closely. She asked about their lives and, before long, about their money. Within weeks, she was inside their homes. In one case from November 2021, she went to an elderly man's home in Las Vegas after gaining his trust. The 2 ordered lunch together, and everything appeared completely normal. But while he wasn't looking, prosecutors say she secretly slipped a powerful prescription sedative into his food or drink. Within a short time, he lost consciousness. He remained unconscious for nearly 5 days, completely unaware of what was happening around him. While he lay helpless, she allegedly took control of his entire life. She stole his phone, tablet devices, driver's license, bank cards, and other personal belongings. Using the information on those devices, she logged into his E-Trade investment account and sold approximately $3.3 million worth of Apple stock. Investigators say she then attempted to transfer the money out for herself. The transfer ultimately failed, preventing one of the largest financial thefts linked to the case. But when the victim finally woke up, almost a week had vanished from his memory. He had no idea what had happened, and he discovered that both his identity and his finances had been compromised. For investigators, the incident revealed something deeply disturbing. It showed that her goal wasn't simply theft. It was to render victims completely defenseless for days, giving her unlimited time to exploit them without resistance. Other victims, however, were never given the chance to wake up. In November 2022, she met another man from Las Vegas through a dating app. As in previous encounters, the evening reportedly began with drinks and conversation. Prosecutors allege she again drugged him with an extremely powerful sedative, leaving him unable to move or make decisions. After he became incapacitated, she allegedly placed him in a wheelchair and transported him across the U.S. The journey ended hundreds of miles away, in a hotel room in Mexico City. While the man remained unconscious, she allegedly used his credit cards to make purchases and access his money. Hotel staff later entered the room and found him dead. By that time, she had already checked out and disappeared, leaving behind another mysterious death that initially appeared to have few obvious answers. Around that same period, authorities say she was also operating in Guadalajara, Mexico. There she met a 69-year-old chiropractor on Tinder while using the name Sissy. The two arranged to meet in person, and shortly afterward, the man stopped communicating with friends and family. Mexican police later found him dead on the bathroom floor of his home. Investigators discovered that the day after his death, someone accessed one of his financial accounts and used it to purchase a gold coin. Another transaction prosecutors believe was part of a consistent pattern of exploiting victims immediately after they were incapacitated or killed. Between 2021 and 2022, investigators say the pattern repeated itself over and over. The victims changed, but the method remained strikingly consistent. She would meet older men, often through dating apps or social settings, earn their trust within hours or days, and then allegedly drug them until they were incapable of defending themselves. Once they were unconscious, prosecutors say she treated their identities, finances, and possessions as if they belonged to her. According to investigators, she stole vehicles, emptied bank accounts, and maxed out credit cards. She purchased gold coins and precious metals that could easily be resold. She spent victims' money on luxury clothing, expensive electronics, motorcycles, hotel stays, airline tickets, and other high-value purchases. Authorities also allege that she changed passwords to victims' online accounts, including Social Security and financial accounts, locking the real owners out while she attempted to take complete control of their identities. Thousands of dollars were allegedly transferred into accounts connected to herself or people close to her, making the money more difficult to recover. As investigators pieced together evidence from multiple states and 2 countries, they realized these were not isolated incidents, but part of a much larger pattern. The FBI later said they had identified at least 11 people they believed had been targeted. Several suffered devastating financial losses. One man survived only after spending days in a drug-induced coma, waking to discover his identity and investments had been exploited. Prosecutors also linked the scheme to the deaths of 3 or 4 victims, though individual criminal charges varied depending on the available evidence in each case. Even those who survived were left with more than financial damage. They lost their savings, their sense of security, and the confidence that a simple dinner date could ever be safe again. When the FBI finally announced the case publicly during a press conference in Las Vegas, officials struggled to compare it to anything they had seen before. The special agent in charge described it as a romance scam on steroids. It was a phrase that immediately captured national attention. Traditional romance scams usually happen behind computer screens. Criminals create fake online identities, spend weeks or months building emotional relationships, and eventually persuade victims to wire money overseas. The victims rarely meet the scammer face to face. According to prosecutors, Aurora Phelps' alleged scheme was far more personal and far more dangerous. She didn't hide behind a keyboard. She sat across the table from her victims. She laughed with them, shared meals and drinks, gained their trust in person, and then, investigators say, secretly drugged them. Once they were unconscious and unable to resist, she allegedly stole everything she could, from cash and investments to vehicles, identities, and in some cases prosecutors believe, their lives. She was able to travel freely between Las Vegas and Guadalajara, crossing jurisdictions whenever authorities began closing in, make purchases, and spend his money as if nothing had happened. By the time investigators in Mexico intensified their search and began connecting the evidence, authorities say she had already returned to Nevada, allegedly preparing for yet another meeting with another unsuspecting victim. The investigation only began to fully come together because not every victim died. A few men survived long enough to tell investigators what had happened to them, providing the first real clues that these incidents were connected. One victim, who had spent nearly 5 days unconscious after allegedly being drugged, eventually recovered and gave investigators a detailed account of the encounter. His testimony became a crucial piece of the puzzle. As detectives examined his financial records, they noticed suspicious transactions that occurred while he was unconscious. Surveillance footage from banks, ATMs, hotels, and retail stores showed the same woman using victims' cards and identification. Cell phone records, electronic devices, travel records, and banking activity began lining up across multiple cases. What initially appeared to be unrelated thefts, disappearances, and unexplained deaths gradually revealed a remarkably similar pattern. The disappearance of Mr. Urbach added another critical piece to the investigation. Friends became alarmed when the normally dependable retiree suddenly stopped answering calls and messages. Days later, a text message arrived from his phone, but something immediately felt wrong. The wording was awkward, written in poor English, and completely unlike the way Urbach normally communicated. Those who knew him believed someone else was sending messages from his phone in an attempt to convince people that he was still alive. For years, his family and friends searched for answers. Then investigators finally identified the decomposed body that had been discovered beside a roadside in Mexico. DNA testing confirmed what many had feared. It was Robert Urbach. His disappearance had become a homicide investigation. Authorities closed in on Aurora Phelps soon afterward. On February 27, 2023, Mexican authorities arrested her at a bank in Guadalajara. According to officials, she remained in custody while investigators in both Mexico and the United States continued gathering evidence, interviewing witnesses, and tracing financial transactions. Because many of the alleged crimes crossed international borders, prosecutors from both countries coordinated their investigations. In the United States, a federal grand jury in Nevada eventually returned a sweeping 21-count indictment against her. The charges included wire fraud, bank fraud, aggravated identity theft, kidnapping, and kidnapping resulting in death, along with several other federal offenses tied to the alleged scheme. If convicted on all counts, she could face multiple life sentences in federal prison. According to the indictment, the operation lasted from at least July 2021 through December 2022. Prosecutors alleged that she deliberately sought out older men, gained their trust through dating apps and in-person meetings, secretly drugged them with prescription sedatives, and then exploited their identities, bank accounts, investments, and personal property. In at least one case, federal prosecutors alleged that the kidnapping directly resulted in the victim's death. While the American case continued moving through the federal court system, Mexico reached a verdict first. In June 2026, a court in the Mexican state of Jalisco convicted Aurora Phelps in connection with Robert Urbach's disappearance and death. After considering the evidence, the judge sentenced her to 37 years and 6 months in prison. Prosecutors had requested a much harsher sentence of 75 years, but the court imposed a shorter term under Mexican law. The legal process, however, was far from over. Immediately after the sentencing, U.S. authorities confirmed they were continuing efforts to extradite her to Nevada so she could stand trial on the federal charges. If extradition is approved after the Mexican proceedings allow it, she could face an entirely separate prosecution in the United States, where the potential penalties, including life imprisonment, are significantly more severe. The woman prosecutors describe as the mastermind of a cross-border romance scheme would then have to answer in 2 different countries for a trail of alleged fraud, kidnappings, disappearances, and deaths that investigators say stretched across nearly 2 years. While Aurora Phelps remained behind bars in Mexico, investigators made an unusual public appeal. The FBI released multiple photographs of her taken over the years, along with a list of the aliases they believed she had used on dating platforms and in everyday life. Officials urged anyone who had interacted with her, even if they had not lost money or believed they had been the victim of a crime, to contact investigators. According to the FBI, the known victims were primarily older men, many of whom appeared to be living alone or recently retired. But agents cautioned that the investigation was still expanding. They warned that women, younger adults, and anyone who had met her socially or through dating apps could also have relevant information. Detectives believed there might be encounters that never resulted in criminal charges but could still help establish her movements, methods, and contacts during the period under investigation. The response was immediate. People from both sides of the U.S.-Mexico border began contacting authorities. Some reported brief encounters that had always felt strange but had never seemed significant. Others described unexplained illnesses after meeting her, suspicious financial activity, or conversations that suddenly made sense after seeing her face on the news. Incidents that had once appeared to be isolated thefts, unfortunate scams, or simple bad luck started looking like pieces of a much larger pattern. For many who had known Aurora Phelps personally, the allegations were almost impossible to reconcile with the woman they remembered.